Did you know like 98% of the super PAC money comes from 1% of the donors? That's how the
Yes.
biggest impact is at a scale where even if you've made a lot of money or you're having a business, most businesses do not have the capital, and certainly most people don't have the capital to even be in this game.
We are celebrating 250 years of this amazing democracy experience that is the United States of America. As we do that on SmarterUmedia, we're going to have some of the people that, in my mind, are true patriots of our day. Today, we're honored to have Jeff Clements. He is the co-founder and CEO of American Promise, one of the organizations working to ensure that there's another 250 years around the corner. Jeff, welcome to SmarterUmedia.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Great to see you.
Well, we're going to talk about way too many things. We've been in the trenches together. It's always an honor to see you, but the chicken timer always taps me on the shoulder. It's like this.
Uh,
No, you got 2 minutes before
all
we
right.
go any further that you're going to help me become smarter today with this fabulous audience of ours. So, Jeff, make me just a little bit smarter.
All right, Steve, here we go, because we're going to talk about the great things in American democracy, and one of them's going on right now with American Promise. I'll say more in the last 30 seconds, but we're going to talk about money in politics. Everybody hates it. Big corruption problem. 74% of Americans say it is the top problem the American country faces ahead of everything else. Endless cycles of $20 billion elections, dark money, toxic attacks, dysfunction, tearing us apart. And you got to ask, if everybody hates this, why do we keep doing it? Why do we have this system? Why don't we fix it? And here's the thing, we're not allowed to. No one asked for this, but we're not allowed to fix this system. We have this system because judges and lawyers came up with a new theory. They invented it. They said spending money in elections is freedom of speech under the First Amendment. So any law that we try to stop the crazy gets struck down by the courts. Now, it's not supposed to be how it was going to work. For 200 years, the courts had never struck down a single anti-corruption law. The theory that money is free speech that only a lawyer could come up with started in the 70s, got worse with the famous Citizens United decision, and has now struck down all kinds of anti-corruption laws. So we have the madness of $20 billion elections and everything else. 80% of Americans oppose this. 80% of Americans want limits on money in elections. But here's the thing, to get that, we need an amendment to the United States Constitution. So that's hard. Haven't done one in a while. 2/3 vote in Congress, ratification in 3/4 of the states, but we are getting it done. 25 states are actually already on past measures, support the amendment, bipartisan support in Congress. 3 out of 4 Americans want it. And at American Promise, we're leading a cross-partisan campaign. We don't care who you vote for. This is for real. We're going to get the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment into the Constitution now.
Oh my gosh, that was just perfect. This guy's so impressed by you. He really so I love this guy. Let's keep him. Let's bring him back he got it right at 2 minutes. So what a great launching pad. You and I have spent time working on this very issue, and it's one near and dear to the hearts, I think, of just about all of us. Because at the end of the day, don't we, Jeff, really want just government that works?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what it's all about. And the beauty of democracy is that it's actually when it works, when we have it, when it's not corrupted, it's actually a really good form of government because you get fast feedback loops so that government gets nimble, government gets responsive to what actually needs to be done. And the feedback loops are now broken. And Steve, I think we first met in the snows of New Hampshire many, many years ago on this very constitutional amendment idea. And I think I'm so glad to catch up with you and give you the update, because you're absolutely right. I've now been in every state in America. I've seen Americans get behind this amendment. Doesn't matter what their political viewpoint is. So your point, Steve, that it's what everybody wants. It's just some basic function of government, and then we can make it work. And we don't have to all agree. We'll argue about lots of things, but we'll basically have Most of us don't want to spend all our time doing politics and government. We have lots of things we want to do, and we need a government that just lets us do that. That's why we call it the 4 Our Freedom Amendment. That's what it's all about.
Yes. Well, let's build the business case. So this predominantly is an entrepreneurship podcast. And if you were in a marketplace where your business essentially was restricted from getting feedback and being able to improve so that you could provide a product, wouldn't be a great system for you or the system itself. And that's essentially what this is. Let's take a little bit of a trip back to the 1970s. Let's go back 50 years, literally 50 years plus, into what happened in 1972.
Yeah, this is a cycle in American life, and it's what the founders worried about. That basically, our vibrant economy is fantastic, but massive growth in the economy can concentrate into political power. And so the democracies always need that sort of check and balance so that the markets stay free and open, and that the political life is not dependent on how much money you have, right? Everybody is a free and equal citizen in this republic. Well, we had one of the most historic corruption crises in 1972. So it's hard for my kids to know and remember. They couldn't remember, they weren't born, but I tell them and they can't believe it. We had a vice president resign after being indicted for bribery. We had a president of the United States who was on tape ordering a cover-up of a break-in against the opponent's headquarters for their campaign so that they could put in bugs. This is the president of the United States, had to resign, driven from office. And basically, this was a campaign finance scandal. The President Nixon's re-election campaign in 1972, they had an idea, which corporate money in federal elections has been illegal since Teddy Roosevelt, 1907. But the geniuses, who actually happened to be the Attorney General of the United States, came up with a scheme where it wasn't going to be disclosed, they realized, because there was no disclosure law until 1970, the next year. So they decided we can raise as much money illegally from corporations as possible before the disclosure happens. So they went basically corporation to corporation, CEO to CEO, and they called it an assessment. They were essentially assessing every corporation. And if you didn't pay up your $100,000, you get ready for your subpoenas and investigation to start. And if you had a problem that you needed fixed, put in your $100,000. Absolute pay-to-play corruption all came out. The American people were outraged, understandably. The politics had gotten the same problem. The feedback loops were closed. The government was basically happening about money. So big response. It worked. We had a big law came out of Congress, 1973.
So just to give context, we hear about Watergate because that's what we still talk about. That was all the Watergate hearings. That's where the information came out, and that led to actual legislation. So the resignation of a president, the resignation of a vice president, corruption exposed, then action happened. Congress passes an act.
Yeah, that's right. And I learned recently, we would think emails or text perhaps. In those days, it was telegram or letter. Congress was getting 30,000 a day from Americans who said, do something. And so Federal Election Campaign Act created the Federal Election Commission, put in limits on campaign spending, total campaign spending, put in limits on contributions, said, and don't think you can run around the contribution limits by giving it to what we would today call a super PAC. Those are going to have limits too. And said, if you're a wealthy billionaire, you got to play by the same rules. You got to go earn your votes. You can't just spend $200 million on your own campaign. So all these kind of rules to basically create a competitive marketplace, create a kind of, it's not perfect. It's Congress, it's law. So but it was the right direction. And so first time in American history, the case goes to the Supreme Court saying, oh, no, we don't want limits. We want to spend as much as we want. And they made an argument that that this law violates the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, protecting the freedom of speech. The appeals court, Steve, said, what are you talking about? And the judge who wrote the opinion for the appeals court that upheld the law, said there's nothing wrong with this law, said it would be very strange, those were the words, strange indeed, if the amount of money you had gave you the ability and the voice to drown out other people who don't have as much as you. And so this idea, because that's what the American tradition had been, there'd never been a law struck down based on free speech that dealt with money in politics. So then it goes to the Supreme Court, and in a longest opinion in the history of the Supreme Court, still to this day, no real author, nobody, you couldn't tell who actually wrote the thing. And it created this, and it needed 143 pages to actually try to explain why money is free speech and why the Supreme Court is going to decide what the rules are instead of the people's representatives about money in politics. So that was the case called Buckley versus Vallejo. It started us down this track. The same track leads right to Citizens United in 2010 and the current system we have today. And the reason is because that was when we lost the ability as Americans to decide what should the rules be in our elections. And until we get that ability back, we're just at the beginning of how bad it could be. But that's why we need the amendment. And that's why we're going to get it back.
There you go. Well, I love that you continue in the fight and your belief in the fight. I do think it's just an interesting progression that you go from corruption exposed to law passed to take care of the corruption. The people who still want to be corrupt come and show up and say, well, we need to find some other way. And essentially, wasn't it the Powell memo? I mean, if you go all the way back to the man who became Justice Powell, who described the process of taking the power from the people and taking it to the judiciary. Then he was sitting on that Supreme Court when Buckley Vallejo came in. And indeed, whether he wrote it or not, certainly there was an influence that made it possible for that decision to say, yeah, you can't tell somebody how much they can spend on an election because that's free speech.
Yeah. Now, Lewis Powell is, tobacco company lawyer for many, many years, wrote the memo that you're describing where he outlined the plan to actually get power transferred to the courts and away from the people to make some of these rules. He referred to the most effective way to do social, economic, and political change is to use his words, an activist-minded Supreme Court. And then he goes up on the Supreme Court a year later after this memo. He definitely influenced the Buckley decision. And we know that because 2 years later, he wrote a 5-4 decision, 1978, the first time in American history, corporations got the right, totally invented, but a free speech right for corporations to spend unlimited money in ballot initiatives. A case called Bellotti, First National Bank versus Bellotti. And that is what led to Citizens United saying, well, not only ballot elections, they can spend money in any election, and you've got money coming from everywhere now. But yeah, Lewis Powell was an architect in the early days.
Well, I just think it's important I don't want to get too wonky, though I find this stuff incredibly fascinating. We find ourselves in a time where people look at the mirror, people look at their democracy, they get their news feed, and they wonder why the system is so, in their minds, broken. The word's used all the time by people on all sides of the aisle. Why doesn't it work? Well, if there's just an infinite amount of ability to spend and no true regulation, and you're going to enlighten us about how dark money works and the sorts of things that make it so we don't really know where the money is coming from. What happens? Why is it so? We know it's broken. Let's list the specifics. And if it all comes down to money, you have a solution, but we have to believe there's a problem and understand the problem.
Money in politics is always going to be with us. And I'm from Boston, where they say politics ain't beanbag. And, we elected a mayor from his jail cell back in the 30s. So, this is not naive, like everything has to be pure. The problem with money in politics, though, is the inability to have any checks on it. That's why it's broken. It is broken, but Americans didn't break it. The court did. Because by saying you can't have limits on it, what's happened is that it's not just a mayor now and sort of localized corruption that you sort of whack-a-mole deal with. It is now systemic. It is so ingrained in the system. So our members of Congress are spending 70% of their time. They're not talking to each other. They're desperately talking to wealthy donors. And it's not just their fundraising, because they could easily be attacked anytime. If they say the wrong thing, some cranky billionaire is going to fund a super PAC, and suddenly the member of Congress is in a $100 million race, trying to figure out, how do I defend myself and explain to my voters anything, because it's just noise from this super PAC. So that's the brokenness, is that you have broken the relationship between we the people, constituents, and those who we elect. You've broken the ability of good people to run for office, because you can't run for office unless you are either extremely rich, and that doesn't mean they're not good people. It just means there's a lot fewer of the pool of good people, because good people can be rich or poor or anywhere in between. But you're minimizing the great American thing where good people can come from anywhere and serve. Instead, you have people can serve as long as they have tons of money or get access to it. So that's not how it's supposed to work. Then you don't get the government actually functioning, because if they try to make compromise, they're going to get primaried. If we try to have a debate about a hot issue, like let's say AI, I'm not taking sides in artificial intelligence. It's a complex issue, but we're not actually having a policy debate about what should we do as a country. We're mostly spectators as citizens, watching the AI forces battle each other, the crypto forces battling each other, and they battle with hundreds of millions of dollars. So most people are not even in the game, and the politicians can't really say what they truly think or discuss compromises, because they're going to get hit with this money. It's now at the local level, Steve. I know a district attorney friend in little Cumberland County in Maine, who got out of the blue hit with a super PAC from Washington, D.C. that just buried him. He doesn't even know why. He's like, why? How did I end up on their radar? I think his problem was he was an independent, and they wanted Democrats in that case. We've got foreign money coming in. The state of Maine had $100 million come in from energy companies, including wholly owned government, foreign government. Canada owns one. The sovereign funds of Qatar and Norway had controlling interests of another. They're spending $100 million in a state like Maine with only 1 million voters and no media market. Maine passed a law saying no foreign money in our elections, struck down by the federal courts, free speech. That's why it's so broken. And that's why it's so hard to fix, because the solutions are obvious. Like, no, we want a law that says no foreign money in our elections, right? We want some limits. So what Americans keep trying to get is a system that I think we all grew up thinking is the system we have, where ideas are debated, anyone can run for office, it's competitive elections, they go and serve. If they do a good job, they get reelected. If they don't, someone can challenge them and there'll be a debate. And then when they get there, they're governing. They're not spending 80% of their time, raising money. So that's gone. And so to get that back, we're going to need some constitutional adjustment.
Yeah. And who are the people who want to are willing to sit and spend 70 to 80% of their time to do that? I mean, it just attracts a pool of people that are not necessarily who we think would be our greatest and best leaders, I don't think.
Yeah. And there's good people in this, and I admire them. They're willing to do it. They're willing to have their families suffer. They're willing to have, live in this horrible system and then have just such a small chance of actually doing anything constructive. For those willing to do it, I applaud them. But you're right. There's a whole lot of other reasons now for all those motives of trying to do something constructive, serving your community. It's now a moneymaker. It's a fame maker. You're just drawing people who not whether they're good or bad. They're not going there to do that job. They're going there for other reasons. And so there's a mix of people. There's some really, good people, but even the good people can't do anything good because they're in a system that, as you said, is broken. So,
Well, and money is buried deep, deep in that whole equation,
that's
whether it's the fact that once you get there, you can go out afterwards and many times just make gigantic fortunes,
yeah,
or you get the influence while you're there to be associated. The best investment in the world could be the best investment in the world could be going to the United States Congress and spending enough to get enough people behind what you do so that you can literally get a different rule for how you're taxed in
yeah,
your business or for your individual corporation, which has happened over and over again. So it's it's a great thing if you're in a corporation or if you're a wealthy person. It's not even a difficult calculus. I think you're thinking, oh yeah, this is the place to invest. That's not necessarily what we think we're in the middle of in this democracy.
yeah. And you want to know how insane it's getting, Steve? I was talking to someone who made what most of us would consider a fortune in business. And he says, the system's really broken. I'm now priced out of the market. So even the money has concentrated so much. Did you know like 98% of the super PAC money comes from 1% of the donors? That's how the biggest impact is at a scale where even if you've made a lot of money or you're having a business, most businesses do not have the capital, and certainly most people don't have the capital to even be in this game. And so that's how crazy it is. And actually that's the great hope for repair, because now it really isn't working for almost everybody unless you're at a global scale of wealth, whether corporate or otherwise. So that's in some ways promising, because we are seeing those kind of people are saying, we got to fix this. This isn't working for anybody.
And I'm not avoiding getting to fixing.
I know. We'll get there when you want to, but I'm happy to. I
No,
just
that's
want
okay. I'm just sort of continuing to make sure we define the issue, because I would say there are a list of things that we would 100% agree make no sense. When I am in my state, I do not want 77 plus percent of all of the money that is spent on the election to come from people outside of my state.
yeah,
That's what happens now all the time in
absolutely.
every race that's competitive.
Yeah, yeah. 20% of the money is coming from 300 families. Literally, 20% of the money, federal money, in the last election was from a handful of billionaires and their families. The most of us don't live in states where those people live. And then even the donors who are at a level, which also most Americans can't afford. I mean, people think, oh, it's nothing. I gave $3,600. I maxed out. Well, most people can't afford $3,600. So even that money is concentrated in a few zip codes in the country. And it is spent burying the people who live in other places so that the debate, they can't be heard at all. I got a friend in Maine who runs an organization called the Sportsman's Alliance. He's a conservative Republican, and he he's been a state senator. He knows his way around politics. He literally, when the Susan Collins race was going on, he could not buy an ad. He could not be heard anywhere because the issues and everything that was defined as an issue was from the super PACs that were, and all the money that was coming in from outside the state of Maine, who had people who spent that had no idea what Maine is, probably where it is on the map. And he said, I asked him, well, it's free speech, they say. And he said, no, we're under an avalanche and we can't be heard and we can't hear each other. And I thought that was a really interesting way. It's the best First Amendment analysis I've heard, which is, if this is free speech, most people actually have no speech. And I loved how he said we can't hear each other, because that's, I think, the vision of American democracy. We don't agree with each other, but we want to know each other's perspectives. We want to learn from each other. We want to debate. And so this nationalized election system where the money comes from outside it has profound effects on this. It's not just the pay to play and the bribery and all the brokenness. It's tearing the fabric, literally, of where people live and how we used to be able to connect, not to all agree and do kumbaya, but to actually live together and govern ourselves and have a sense that we have an ability to influence our futures and our kids' futures.
And it's going to take a constitutional amendment,
I knew we'd get there.
which we worked on together in New Mexico and New Hampshire. The idea of a constitutional amendment, we have a system that is supposed to allow itself to change, right? It's built in. There's a mechanism to do it. We've done it 27 times. So tell me about how it is you feel we're headed toward that 28th.
Yeah. And I love how you put that, Steve, because that's what we really have to get more used to as Americans. This is normal. A constitutional amendment is not, let's be done with the eye rolling and no, good luck with that. Like, this is actually normal. This is what Americans do. It's what we've always done. It's 40% of the Constitution is in the amendments. The Bill of Rights, we elect senators because of amendments. Women vote because of amendments. We don't have slavery because of amendments. Like, this is what we do. 8 amendments reverse Supreme Court decisions, just like this one's doing. So we got to demystify it. But this is Smarter You. So we got to learn about, because we haven't done one in 50 years. So we got to brush up on our Article 5 of the Constitution. So let's demystify it. Can I do that, Steve?
Would you please? Would you take the mist out and away from my eyes?
Great. So let's talk about this amendment first. You might be thinking, your listeners might be thinking, I know you're not because you've been in this work, but some of your listeners might think, oh, campaign finance, constitutional amendment, eyes are glazing over. It's going to be 1,000-page bill. No, it fits on a napkin. I'm going to try to get this in focus. There you go. And the napkin has 3 sections. So section 1 simply defines the interests that we have in regulating money and politics, which the Supreme Court denies. Some of the things you were talking about, federalism, the role of the states, like, it matters actually that elections are decided by people who live there, not somewhere far away. Free speech for everybody, not just those with money, right? Things like that. The national security, we got foreign money coming in, we should stop that. So it defines the interest. Section 2 simply says we, the people, have the power to decide that. And so our states will make the state rules for state elections, Congress for federal elections, and we'll be able to have limits in whatever we decide we want about money and politics. And then Section 3 does something really important. The Supreme Court made a mistake when they said, it doesn't matter where the speech, i.e. money, is coming from, human or otherwise, and corporations have the same rights and unions and everything else. And now we have AI, right? So we have to put the human back in the Constitution. And so Section 3 says we can distinguish between human beings and what we're going to do and what are tools, whether corporate, union, artificial intelligence, and who knows what in 50 years. This is forever. So 3 simple sections radically changes the direction of the country. We move the question of who decides, who makes the rules, from the lawyers in Washington to the American people. And so with that one change, we start down a completely different road and a brighter future for the country. So how do we get the change?
Now we get to talk about Article 5.
Yeah. So we're doing it at American Promise. We're doing it the same way Americans have always done it. There's a convention mechanism. We don't really need to talk about that. I'm happy to, but that we've never done a convention. The way we've always done it in America, 27 amendments, we win and we make them do it, a 2/3 vote in Congress. So that's math. It's not complicated. It's hard, but not complicated. 290 votes in the House, 67 in the Senate. The amendment then goes out to the state legislatures and they vote on it. Majority vote in the state legislatures. 3/4 of the states need to do it. You then have an amendment in the United States Constitution for the rest of time until we decide to amend it again if we want, like, prohibition and repeal it. So that's it. And now it's hard. And so the way that Americans have always figured out how to make Congress do what maybe Congress doesn't want to do, which is why we need to amend the Constitution in the first place, we actually bring it home. We go to the states, just like you and I met in New Hampshire. We were in New Mexico. You bring it to the people. Amendments happen when we're talking about this around the kitchen table, down at the hockey rink, at a bar, where then we get our state legislators moving. Then we get the states. They're already ready to ratify, we call it. They're saying, we want this amendment. And so even though Congress is supposed to start the process, always, if you want to win, Congress is kind of the last to know. And then they have the vote, and it's kind of like a tipping point. So 3/4 of the amendments got ratified 18 months to 24 months after coming out of Congress. That's because the states actually started the idea. They were ready for it. And so that's how you do it. It's again, not easy, but it's simple in what it says, and it's simple in how we do it if we decide to do it. And fortunately, we're really seeing a lot of progress.
Well, you said 25 states. So 25 states, and some of the recent ones like Utah, et cetera, are very interesting examples of where the interest can come from. But tell us a little bit about what momentum looks like.
Yeah, well, here's what momentum looks like. The last 3 states, Steve, just this last year so far, over the previous 12 months or so, 3 more states came on, and they're pretty red states. And the Democrats are already for this, and the Republicans are now for this, and that's when you get the tipping point to an amendment. And so the Utah vote in the legislature was 63-9 in the House, 20-4 in the Senate. So that's not a close vote. This is like a kind of, again, tipping point, obvious. Amendments are impossible until they're obvious and inevitable. And so we're hitting that stage with votes like that. The next one was Oklahoma, unanimous votes in the Oklahoma legislature. Idaho, unanimous in the legislature. And I'm actually in Washington, D.C. as we're talking today, because we were up on Congress yesterday with Congressman Tom Barrett. He's a Republican from Michigan. He is a combat veteran, Army helicopter pilot. We were actually had a great conversation. He's passionate about this. He introduced a Republican version, which is very close to the amendment I held up and described, into Congress. And the Democrats already have their version. And so, we're moving with that now in Congress. So the mechanism is actually working. 25 states, huge votes. Every American knows we got to do this. And even Congress is starting to move towards that 2/3 vote.
It feels a little bit, excuse me to get just religious on you, it feels a little bit like the book of Revelations. That has inspired so many people to be in churches across the country at various times, thinking that the big event's about to happen. I mean, how bad does it have to get, right? When there's stuff raining from the skies and you think, oh, this is the second coming. I mean, in some ways, we are inspired by when it gets bad. And you look back at what we discussed earlier in the 70s, when it got really bad.
Yeah.
And we said, whoa. It's this wake up moment. I feel like you may be in the middle of that, right? I say we're in the middle of this moment that we say, if we don't fix it, we lose it. This thing that Ben Franklin said, if you can keep it, madam, when he was asked what it is, it's a republic, if you can keep it. We may be there, and that's what may inspire us to move.
Yeah, I love that because, first, you got to think of Winston Churchill in times like this, because he said,
best quotes ever, best quotes. If you want to have a great quote, go to Winston.
And this one's pretty good. He was probably frustrated during the World War II when he wanted to do everything and Americans were kind of taking over the job. But he said, Americans always do the right thing after exhausting all the other possibilities. So it's something to that we, and understandably, we got, kids and jobs and different things. We shouldn't have to go and amend the Constitution and fix things, right? But we do every now and then, because we realize the wheels have come off and there's nobody else. That's what government of the people is. There's nobody who's going to come and fix this. I'm a religious man too. I'm not counting on the second coming to come and save us our politics. There's other reasons for my faith, but it's not because somehow we're going to rely on, some intervention. It's up to us to fix this. And the reason I love it so much, Steve, that you brought it up, because again, I look to the history to realize like this is normal. This is what we do. So if you look at when amendments happen, there's 10 right after the revolution, really tough times. They didn't amend the Constitution much until the Civil War, really tough times, 3 more. And we think like, oh, that was big and we don't do it except Civil War and Revolution. But no, 1910 to 1920, very hard times as well. Similar stresses, technological change, concentrated power, great economic transformations, massive immigration, world war, and yes, epidemic, all the things they had that we have. Dysfunctional government, political assassination, division, 4 constitutional amendments in 7 years in that decade. 1961 to 1971, we talked about some of the challenges in 72. The cities were burning. President resigned from office, and these were tough times. And 4 constitutional amendments between 1961 and 1971. So you see these amendment eras that come when the wheels have come off, when the fires coming down from the sky, when Americans realize like, oh my God, we're going to lose this if we don't step up. And fortunately, we're stepping up again, just like we did before.
I mean, the Article 5 bar is high intentionally. It's not supposed to be something that we do every day, but to have a 2/3 vote in both houses and to go and get 3/4 of all of the state legislatures to agree is a big bar, but not only not impossible, I mean, it happens. The Equal Rights Amendment was so close. I mean, I was down in Virginia when we were moving with the then Fix It America Amendment when the Equal Rights Amendment was up because they needed still one more state. There was a question whether that would work or not to pass it, and it didn't happen. But that means, it's not easy. You've been at it for quite some time. Those halls that you're walking in, you're in DC right now. That is very interesting because you and I have walked behind bagpipes to those offices in a dramatic show, hundreds of people with us to go and talk to our representatives to say this is something that matters and that we want to have move. But those humans have to make those decisions.
That's
and
right.
That seems to be hard to get them to agree on much today.
Yeah, that's right. And, we started American Promise in 2016. And again, we don't care who you vote for. We're nonpartisan, we're cross-partisan, we're Republicans, Democrats, Independents. This is much bigger than politics.
And by the way, you really do mean that. I mean, the interesting thing is it takes a while for people to believe that you really mean that. And
it's so rare today, right? It shouldn't
have rubber on the road, and it's sort of, honestly, I think I enjoy my conversations, my political conversations with my friends who are on a different side because we actually have substantive conversations.
Yeah. People really love this kind of work and this aspirational fight for the country, really, in the future, because it's the one place where we can actually not be forced into those partisan labels and divisions that are so prevalent. And truly and I don't mean just sort of the middle Democrats and roots. This is not no labels. This is like Bernie to Trump and everyone in between working together to get this done. And so, but we knew it would take time. We accepted the assignment. That's been our message. There's no shortcut because, like you said, an amendment, it has to be consensus. I'm really glad Article 5 is hard because, there's been a lot of proposals. We're talking about binding the American people. We, the American people, deciding we're going to bind ourselves and our next generations to a rule. You better have a tough process before you do that because everybody needs to be at the table if you're going to do that. And we love that assignment because we want everyone at the table. And so we go to every state. We go do the work in Congress. There's no shortcut in it, but there's also, if we're going to talk religion again, there's redemption. There's redemption for the country. There's redemption for the idea that we, the people, are sovereign and will govern ourselves. And there's nothing that more rewarding than that. So this is work that is hard, but it's not frustrating. It's it's really for everyone who gets involved. As you know, Steve, you've been in it, and there's just something really powerful about going for it and seeing fellow Americans of all different views joining you in that.
Well, a friend, good friend, who is on a different political spectrum than I am, and who has worked in multiple uh, departments of justice administrations, describes where we are now in a very interesting way. And I think you would understand and agree with this sort of analysis. It's sort of, you think of the spectrum, we want to think of the spectrum as a line. It's sort of, there's a line, there are Democrats, there are Republicans, but literally what's happened in time is there's been this bending of the line so that a lot of people are meeting in that place up here that's the same space
Yeah,
both share, because it's always moving. What if so few people probably even know the origin of their party? So if you think of the conservative social values, and yet you think the Republican Party was the one that really was behind abolition,
yeah,
they were the abolitionists. That's where it started, and
yeah,
where the Democratic Party started was, with Andrew Jackson, who was marching native populations from Tennessee to Oklahoma. I
yeah.
mean, it is not something that sits and stays where it always is. In fact, we're always evolving. And we may be at that point where we're starting to evolve together because people want to keep us apart so bad. It's that thing that happens with magnets, where we're going to flip and we're just going to draw together.
I like the metaphor. I think that's yeah, and I think it's also because there's a certain futility in the other fights because I think a lot of Americans have woken up to the fact that we're kind of being played. We're supposed to go out and vote, and we're supposed to buy that it's really going to change everything, and we're supposed to hate each other because the other side, quote unquote, isn't going to do the thing that our guy's going to do, and then we end up like we've been in this cycle for 20 plus years or so, where who always loses seems to be most of the American people on things. And even little things that try to get solved usually get undone in the next administration and changed. And there's always the payoffs that the players you got to pay off in order to even get tiny stuff done. And I think people are realizing, even the most partisan people, like if they want to actually have a real argument about what they care about, there's something bigger that they're going to have to work on with people they don't agree with. And I think that's also some of the coming together. It's sort of up here on a bigger plane. Like let's get a competitive field that we can actually go back to fighting about those things, and it will actually matter. That we actually can bring solutions to the American people, and have to prove it. But now, no politician ever has to prove anything. No one's accountable for anything because they can't actually do anything. When's the last time you heard a big law come out of Congress and anything that actually is responsive to some of the serious challenges we have? So I think people are realizing, and your friend is right, things don't stay in part, and where they end up reorienting is to the needs of the day of the people, and the needs of the day are clearly that we got a systems problem, not a policy debate here, and let's fix that systems problem.
Yeah. And the systems problem, there's probably a whole list, right? So you are working on the corrosive effect of money as speech in politics and changing that dynamic, which would be profound. As you said, when these things happen, usually amendments happen more than one. One of the things that we also worked on, so in the amendments that we passed in New Hampshire and in New Mexico, were included a clause that was about redistricting. So you can't cheat when you draw the line. That's an oversimplified way of doing the language. But I mean, we're in a circumstance right now where there will be something like 25 competitive races in the next election cycle.
Yeah.
And that makes it pretty hard. All the money knows where to go, right? I mean, that's the thing, because we're just essentially drawing lines so that we can win no matter what, almost.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, the many things I love about you, Steve, is I am ambitious with an amendment idea, I think, and I'm glad it's come so far. But you had three amendments, if I recall, at least two, the
Well,
gerrymandering
and
and
we gave up on the third one because from both sides, it just wasn't, they both objected, which
right. But
yeah.
what was the third one?
And the third one was term limits.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So almost all the things you just mentioned are like 80% support from the American people. Term limits, most people want it. I mean, it's insane that, they cart the senators in and out on the trays to basically cast a vote sometimes, and Susan Collins, and I'm not picking, Democrats do this too, so this isn't partisan, but she took a term limits pledge, 2 terms. She's now running for her 6th term. So it's just like, term limits were also struck down by the Supreme Court, just like our money rules. So another example where we're not getting what most Americans actually want our system to be. And so that will take an amendment. The gerrymandering, you're absolutely right on that. So I do hope, I think it's hard to combine them into one because you get different, it's complicated and you get different sort of factions and coalitions. So but I do think I'd encourage, and we do encourage, anyone who's got an amendment idea, and now's the time, get in the game, go for it. And because there will be, I'm convinced there'll be 3 or 4, just like the last times we've been in this situation. We're hitting to $40 trillion in debt. You're hearing about, fiscal responsibility amendments because Congress can't do it themselves. They need our help as citizens with a rule in the Constitution. They got to be more fiscally responsible. So I would be surprised. I know our amendment's going to go through. We're moving that. We're going to get it done. I say we, the country. American Promise doesn't amend the Constitution. Americans do.
Right.
We serve the country for that. But I'm convinced we'll get several of these other amendments, and we will fix it, America, to Steve Lipscomb's phrase.
Well, sat with Senator Lugar and his chief of staff while he was still alive. It wasn't one of those really, strange zombie meetings. But I sat with Senator Lugar to try to find out what happened with McCain-Feingold when there was a moment that both sides came together and actually passed substantive regulations that, of course, were struck down in Citizens. So we know that reality, but I said, how did that happen? And basically his response was, you do what you're doing. You do what American Promise is doing. You go out and you get people to have consensus around a thing, whether it's the specific language or language that can be modified, whatever, so that it sits in a drawer. And like the SALT talks, when both sides feel like you can spend and you're not going to get any more benefit out of having more nuclear weapons, you sit down and talk. And it feels very much like that when you see what happens with money in our political machine. If both sides feel like neither side feels like they have a great advantage, then you can sit down and you want to be able to pull out of a drawer the napkin that was left there by Jeff Clements.
Yeah, that's right.
And that allows you to at least have the discussion start in a meaningful place.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You got to be ready when the moment comes because you might not get another chance. So doing the work, even though you're not sure how the end game plays out, is really key for all of us because the moment is coming and we'll be there. We got to be there because it'll be in the drawer, as you say, and that's what will move. And so I think we'll see the opportunity because I think you put it in terms that I think are we got to remember. The stakes are really high. I mean, we really could lose this system that we can take for granted if we're not careful, and so it's very serious and grave. But to be ready when that moment comes, because they are humans. And it is simple. It's 290 people raising their hand saying yes and 67 in the Senate. So that it's just putting in the work. And what's better to celebrate the 250th anniversary of America, right? Than just acting as if it works, and it will work if we act like it works. So we can amend the Constitution after all this time.
Yeah. And the 28th, 29th, and 30th Amendments, all of which sort of get us to a systemic adjustment. And I think you
Yeah,
used the right word, because these things are at the core. It's very hard for the other things to work when the system is not working,
yeah,
which leads me to a very wonky question, the Porter study. I mean, in 2017, this Harvard study that tried to find out why it was that the system was so broken, and essentially concluded, well, it was kind of built to work this way. So it's pretty efficient at what it does. It just may not do what you want it to do. How does that fit into your calculus?
well, I think Michael Porter is a Harvard Business School. He's passed away now, I believe, but he, at the time, very renowned, and his background actually was in antitrust too, and he saw this as a duopoly problem. So when he was saying it's working the way it functions, it's sort of like, for those of us who still remember the Coke Pepsi battles. It's basically two soda companies. um, you know, it actually worked well to be battling with each other because they both sold a lot more. So the system worked. And so he was describing, I think, the two-party system where those who are in it and controlling it are um, doing exactly what the parties would want. The money's pouring in. They're able to buy and sell laws. They're, all the stuff that we say is a problem.
Yeah.
He's describing as well. That's what it looks like when you have a duopoly. And so, what do we do with monopolies and duopolies? If we introduce competition. So he had a lot of ideas about competition, thinking like ranked choice voting and open primaries and some things like that. And there's good ideas around that. But what I thought was interesting is what he and those who kind of rallied around this was, he had also identified the biggest problem being money in politics, because that is what is driving the power that keeps reinforcing this system. But he thought it was too hard. He thought an amendment, and Catherine Gale, who worked with him, said the same thing, like, we have to do things that can work in the short term. So it came up with these other reforms, and didn't really recognize, I think, both the problem is very hard to solve without looking at the constitutional origins of the problem, and missing the opportunity that Americans were ready to do and knew we had to do something really big. So that's my take on Michael Porter. Is I wish he were here to see the napkin and the progress, because I think he'd be encouraged and delighted that maybe he underestimated America.
Yeah. And small incremental changes get overwhelmed.
Yeah, they get overwhelmed, and they're just as hard. You know, I joke with my friends who support ranked choice voting that, and who also like our idea that, you know, I'm not sure which one's short term, which one's long term, because I think we're going to get this amendment ratified before we'll have ranked choice voting, and in that many states. So that's because it's going to be up to the states if they want ranked choice voting, and different states can and should do different things. Doesn't have to be uniform everywhere, but the beauty of our amendment is it isn't uniform. It's not imposing one rule for everybody. It gives them the power to make their own rules.
Well, you know that the entire equation's on its head. So you and I know that depending on what poll you're looking at, essentially we trust and approve of Congress at a 14 to 15% level. And yet we love our congressperson, so reelect them 95 to 96% of the time. Yeah, Rubik's Cube. I mean, where you're trying to find those votes that you're trying to find right now to get 2/3 in each of the houses of Congress.
I think it's a good metaphor, the Rubik's cube, because there is a lot of complexity. So if you take a member of Congress, it's not like a body in isolation sitting there in Washington, D.C., although it may feel like that a lot of the time, right? It's actually got still a connection to a place, right? These people are come from a place, they come from a town, they come from a community, they are elected, they have interests that that state has that are different than interests in other states. Their regional and state differences really are important. There's different agendas. So there's opportunities in those differences for something like this that a lot of people agree on. And so I think the beauty of doing this at the state level first, if you're a member of Congress from Idaho and you just watch the legislature have a unanimous vote saying Congress, because that's what they're voting on. They're saying we support this amendment, we're ready to ratify it, and we want Congress get moving, right? If you're looking at the politics of your state, which one thing these guys are good at is the politics of their state. The re-election is really important to most of them. So something like that going on back home, that's going to get their attention. So they'll have to navigate all the other Rubik's cubes, and we do too about it. But in the end, it's not, we're not betting on angels here. We're betting on human beings making rational calculations about what's in their interest. What's in their interest is getting reelected. If you're against this amendment, I'm telling you, it will be hard to be reelected if we do our job as Americans, right? If we act like what we tell Pew Research, which is this is the most important problem the country faces, if we vote that way, we will ask our candidates at every level, do you support a constitutional amendment so I and my neighbors can actually have a voice in what the rules are going to be here? And if they say, well, what are you talking about? You give them the napkin. And if they say, oh, no, I'm against this, why would you vote for them? Right. So in the end, it is again, not complicated. It's just takes a lot of work and time. And honestly, what's interesting is respect. We don't assume anyone's an enemy. We talk with everyone in Congress. It's like, Steve, most people are actually pretty interesting, and people will surprise us all the time. So how did an unelected, all male United States Senate vote for constitutional amendments to give women the vote, which, even though that wasn't how they got there, and to actually have to be elected, which is not what we used to do with senators. So the only reason they did is because this kind of effort makes it in the end like just a raw political calculation. If they're going to vote for the amendment and have a chance to come back to the Senate, or they're going to go back home and not come back. At least enough of them. We don't need everybody.
As you said, it's work, and
Yeah.
you're doing the work in those places, and you're in the process of trying to get people behind particular legislation. How are you doing on that front?
Yeah, well, let me describe our model, because it's a model we can replicate all day long, and we could do this in every state, and it works. The good thing about our approach is we're not parachuting in and just like getting a vote in the legislature and leaving. The work is actually with the people who live there. So we listen first. How do they want to talk about it? What is their concern? How do we help them? We're there to serve. So we tend to work, the coalitions, quote unquote, is not really what we do, except by working with, Rotary clubs, local chambers of commerce, the people who are in the state who are already in networks that aren't particularly partisan, that actually are civic minded, like these service groups and others. And we just bring in the idea. Do we hire good government affairs firms to accelerate this work? Yes, we do. And because that is, again, getting what works in that state for those people who live there. And so we just find it's much more efficient to learn at the front end by engaging in that. Then we end up, the first thing you need in a law, to go back to the civics, is a sponsor. Somebody in the legislature actually has to carry it. So we're always looking for, if it's a conservative state, we're going to start on the right. If it's a liberal state, we'll start on the left. Ideally, we do it cross-partisan in some states. Other states, we actually don't want to be cross-partisan because the state is like Idaho is a good example. It's not like Democrats can't vote for it. There's just not that many of them. So we don't need to like pretend that there's a bipartisan kumbaya moment. We want to have, we talk to the leadership about this. We make the case. We bring some of the business people and the Rotarians and the local people to talk to them. So they see, oh, this seems like a good idea. Like, why should we in Idaho be getting all this foreign money? And I think by that, they mean San Francisco and Boston and places, right, in our state, dominating our voices. So it's that kind of hard work. But then when we win, here's what's interesting to get to your question, like, how does that model actually deliver votes in Congress? We then don't just go to Congress and tell them, hey, Idaho just did this. Let me take Utah as an example because there's a very specific congressional example. So in Utah, one of the groups we worked with is the Sutherland Institute. They're conservative, sort of federalism oriented. They really like this idea. And again, for one of the points you raised, which is like, why is every election sort of national donor battles? We need to have it be more state-based. So they really like this idea. They sponsored, discussions with the Senate Majority Leader and the public discussions. People learned about it. I spoke there. They're a great group. We did a podcast with them. So it just helped us like engage the people of Utah in the legislature. Well, when we got the vote that won, the Sutherland Institute came to Washington with a report that they had written about the For Our Freedom Amendment and federalism. We brought legislators with them from Wyoming, Utah. I don't think we had Idaho at that one, but we've done it before with Texas and other states. We bring the legislators, and then we have a big meeting on the Capitol Hill and invite. In this case, the Democrats are on board. We wanted to invite the Republicans, so we asked the Utah member of Congress to give us a room at a podium of the U.S. House of Representatives, so we could invite all the members and staff to come and listen to the state legislators and this group and us talk about why this amendment matters to the people back home. And that is actually what led directly to the introduction of the amendment yesterday by Congressman Tom Barrett. He reached out because he couldn't make the meeting. He reached out to our congressional affairs team and said, I can't make the meeting. I'd love to learn more. The conversation started. He loved it, introduced the amendment last Thursday. That's how it works.
That's how it works. Boy, we're rooting for you. All of the 80% who believe in this, 80% plus, we're all rooting for it and hope you get there.
Well, I would just amend, I appreciate your good wishes, Steve, and I'd amend it to say, we get there, not you get there, because it's got to be we or we don't get there.
All back. We hope we get there.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being the great patriot that you are as we celebrate 250 years of this great democracy doing all of that good work. So now I'm going to get to that question we always ask everybody, which is to help us curate our information. It's an information age. What sources do you have that you can give me that will help me get better information, particularly about democracy and the process? I hope it will be AmericanPromise.net.
Yeah, well, I brought two because I did want to put a plug in, not just a plug for the organization, but AmericanPromise.net. If it's not a resource, we're not doing our job, because that's the whole point. We exist to be a resource on this issue for the American people. Again, we don't care who you vote for, where you live. If we can help you amend the Constitution, that's what we're there for. So AmericanPromise.net is actually a pretty good resource. And you'll follow the money, you'll follow the solution. We got a map. You can check out your own state and see in your state how far along it is, how you can get involved. So AmericanPromise.net is actually a terrific place to go. You can read about the amendment and dig in the weeds. You can go as far into it as you want. But I do have one other, which we rely on at American Promise, and it's if you want to walk out, but they also have stories and And I'm so glad they exist, or who knows how little we would actually know about the system. But Open Secrets, so opensecrets.org is tracking the money. They're also nonpartisan. There's no angle, but they get the goods on the super PACs, on the federal election money, the states. They're really, really top notch if you want to understand and see how money is actually moving and influencing and affecting our lives. Really, it's in our elections, but ultimately it's affecting the lives of every American. So opensecrets.org, AmericanPromise.net.
I look forward to you being back on SmarterUmedia when we are through Congress and on our way to get ratification in the states. That'll be a great new milestone. Jeff Clements, thanks so much for coming. Thanks to you and all of the people at American Promise for working to keep our democracy here and healthy.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be with you again, and I hope to see you in real life soon.